This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tank Girl, Miriam Joie.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is January 8th, 2018. We're at CES, and it's my birthday, at least for another hour or so. Woohoo! I get to win.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, Paul. My guest is here, Paul Spain of the New Zealand Tech Podcast, and also the founder of World Podcasts, which is the wonderful company hosting my podcast. Thanks for being on.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I know.
It's great to catch up and hang out on a podcast in person.
Sweet. So we're going to recap CES so far. And you're going to say, why would we do that when technically it doesn't start till tomorrow morning? That's because a lot of people have this misconception that the media don't actually get involved until the first day. But we actually get involved 2 days before the show. We start on what I call day -1, which is Sunday this year. And then Monday is day 0, also known as press day, which was today, which all the press conferences take place. And then, of course, then we have day 1 tomorrow and day 2 until the end. And I'm actually not staying till the end of the show. So, Paul, what did you do mostly? You said you went to Unveiled, and then you did some podcasts today. You went to Sony today.
Yeah, so Unveiled is always a really interesting event because it tends to be the first thing that is open for media, or the first thing of scale for media. There was also a tech trend session that CES put on before that, and there are all sorts of other things that go on surrounding that are possible to go to. But Unveiled is interesting because you just get anyone who is vaguely considered press and is able to get a press badge for CES.
Yeah, it's an official CES event,
and it's actually every year that I've come, and I haven't actually been the last couple of years, but it just seems to get more busier and more packed, and more vendors there showing off their products this year. One thing that stood out is it seems as though maybe the French government are putting some funding into the French companies, because there were so many French companies. And that was curious, and what they had to show was generally pretty interesting, interesting too. In terms of things that stood out for me, it's always hard to kind of pick. Well, what are the things here that are actually going to be successful? Because they call it Unveiled for a reason. There's a sort of unveiling of new products, sometimes products that are yet to really be ready for market, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about this a little bit, because again, remember, our audience does not necessarily know how this works. So what I want you to understand is this, that so we described the press pre-event days. There are 3 kind of sub-events within CES. And one is actually an official CES event, and that's CES Unveiled, which took place on day -1, which was Sunday, yesterday. And then today is an independent event that you don't actually have to have a CES badge to go. You have to have their own registration to go, called Pepcom Digital Experience. And then tomorrow, on day 1 of the show, is a third show, a sub-show like this called Showstoppers. And that also does not require to have a CS badge, but it does require to have a registration with them. These 3 events are in the afternoon, evening of these 3 days consecutively, and are basically kind of like shrunk down mini CESs within a CES. And they are specifically around smaller companies usually, although there are some bigger ones. But they are for the media only and analysts only. So you're not going to get the trade show type business folks there. So it's geared for journalists and analysts to get content for their beat. And that's what I like about them. And, you find a lot of innovation. Well, relatively speaking. I mean, it varies from year to year. And I felt that Unveiled has grown a lot, as you said. And I think there was some good stuff there yesterday. Usually Pepcom is the one that really has substance. And I felt very disappointed with it tonight. Maybe it's because I'm tired, because it's been a long day, because you've done podcasts, but I've attended press conferences all day. So, and we can talk about these press conferences, but I think it's really interesting to see how it evolves. And I'll be curious to see what we see at Showstoppers. But really nothing stood out for me at PepCom. It seems that the general theme is security is very prominent. Like a lot of like your pipes might burst and we need to be able to warn you remotely and shut down your water supply. So that kind of security, but as well as, security cameras, security, devices. I think it reflects well on the state of the US zeitgeist that we live in today with the current regime. And it's kind of fascinating. But a lot of it seems, redundant to me. It's like, you don't need to put IoT and Wi-Fi and connectivity and smarts with quotes on everything. Like I always say, the tea kettle is kind of the perfect example. It whistles when the water's hot. You will hear it. It would make more sense to have a stove that can be remote controlled in case you forget to turn it off, or that can detect the whistle and shut off the burner, than it does to have a smart kettle that sends notifications to your phone that already receives notifications from everything else in your house. And that's why I'm segueing into the other big, thing I've noticed at CES so far, and that's Google Assistant. Like Alexa kind of did it first in terms of IoT and controlling your home and controlling these devices, these connected devices. And that's the universal UI. You talk to the thing and it interfaces with everything. And I think that's what makes Alexa so compelling. It's not that it's Amazon. It's not that it's really that smart. It's actually not that good of an AI. But it's that it interfaces so many devices and becomes the universal remote. And you don't have to have a phone on you to do it. It's everybody can use it. It's like everybody knows how to use it. And so the big push this year so far seems to be for me at CES that Google, they even have a monorail with a big "Hey Google" decal vinyl on it, is that, quote unquote, CES this year is, Google Assistant all the things. Like every big TV that was launched, every big appliance that was launched, even smaller companies, everyone has Google Assistant baked in, or Alexa. Or an integration with it. And of course, Samsung has Bixby and stuff. And then, LG this morning announced ThinkQ, that brand that they've had for a while. They want to turn that into an AI brand. But to me, what's fascinating is that, we're finally seeing a huge marketing push from Google here. And the partners are following through. But what we're not quite seeing yet, and I'm not quite sold on, is I'll give you an example. I have Zigbee light bulbs and a Zigbee hub, and it's not like a SmartThings hub, which is a Zigbee hub, but it's an Almond hub, and I love it because it's very modular and very open. But Alexa is the only thing right now that can control it. I'm not that invested in Alexa, but I'm very invested in the Google ecosystem, and I want Google Assistant to control my lights. And the moment that bridge the gap with my hub, I'll be very happy. But that's not happening right now. And so the verdict's still out, even though all these devices have been announced that have the assistant, the IoT wrapper part of it still doesn't seem to be there. And I want to see that happening because ultimately for me, having the ability to both use Google Assistant as a good AI, which it already is, and Alexa isn't, but also as a controller, universal voice controller for all my IoT is the holy grail.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of issues with trying to have all our bits and pieces of technology work together well in the past. The sort of announcements that we've seen, particularly today, are giving me confidence that things are going to work better together going forward. So. And there does seem to be, a lot of openness from the big players to work with both Google and with Amazon, with Alexa. And so there seems to be plenty of that. There are lots of new bits and pieces coming to fill in the gap. So I'm reasonably hopeful. But then there are also new products coming in, and there was a new assistant that I saw yesterday at Unveiled. Had a little screen. I'm trying to remember its name. You may have seen it as well. And talking to them, I was wondering, where does this fit into the market? and they highlighted to me they're looking to organise telco type relationships, so that has embedded LTE in it, and this is the sort of thing that they might cut a deal with a really big carrier, or I think they're working on lots of carrier arrangements. They're still a startup, sort of still reasonably early stage from a funding perspective, based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, but there were all manner of new products being shown off. There were smart shoes that were kind of curious. The bit that stood out to me around the idea of smart shoes, because what you were talking about, do we need technology in this thing and that thing and in the kettle and so on, was that it was coming from a traditional shoemaker. And this was not a tech startup. So this was a
Nike or Reebok, Adidas.
No, this was a French company. So another one that probably had some government. I'm guessing some government or some funding to put them there. As
an aside, there was a lot of French companies that unveiled yesterday. You're right, like an entire two aisles, and I think maybe that was some sort of government connection. I mean, they do have an R&D kind of promotional office at the French consulate in San Francisco. I know that. It's interesting. But anyway, you're right. I think that it's good to see, I like innovation. I want to see new things. I just sometimes feel like, smartifying or connecting things for the sake of doing it is not necessarily the way to go. And I think I want to see more people be more selective, companies be more selective on how they do it and why they do it, rather than just blindly doing it, right? And ultimately, I think this will happen. Right now, there's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of people that are just doing it because they know they can make a buck maybe doing it, or because they're, when I talk to some of these founders, as a journalist, I'm like, have you left your office any time in the last year? Because have you looked around out there? Because I don't see anybody getting potentially excited about this product. And I'm serious. There are some products, I know there's, different strokes for different folks and stuff. But there are things I'm like, no, nobody wants this. This does not need to exist. And that's my point. And, in the past few years, we've seen a lot of that. And I'm afraid to say that we saw a lot of that unveiled and at PepCom tonight.
And that will continue to be the case, I think, at these shows. In some ways, this is a chance for those companies to put something out in front of an audience, and maybe they should be working that out, how to do that better before putting it out. But they put it out. Do we get attention from the media? Do we get attention from the public? Maybe somebody shares it on social, and they get some feedback that they weren't expecting, and they make a pivot. But I think this is actually possibly part of the innovation process for some companies.
You're right.
And the validation
and they
process.
Need to validate it for sure.
So I'm okay with that, but certainly some of them you do chuckle at and wonder why they're spending money turning up at these shows and developing these products.
My concern is that using CES for validation I don't think is a good strategy, and I do consulting around this stuff, and I think the reason for that is because we are bombarded as journalists at CES with this stuff, and it makes it much harder for us to we get jaded and worn out. It gets much harder for us to really pick out the things that stand out, because we don't get to see everything, because we're pressed on time and there's so much stimulation. And as such, I'm kind of of a belief that perhaps we should really just be out at CES as a company, as a startup, once things are actually at a state of being ready, more or less. So a bit more consumer ready. To me, that's the stuff you do, with crowdfunding, or, you go out there and you do market research, although I don't believe in market research. I think generally the best ideas, people have no idea they really need it. And
sure.
So, it's a bit contradictory with what I said earlier, but I really do believe that's true, because if you talk to, people who have obviously worked with Apple over the years, there's a lot of products that have come out of that company that, we didn't think we needed, but then now we have and we love. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean that, and Apple and Steve Jobs has certainly sort of taken quite a position on that. I think other companies take different approaches in terms of how they develop and innovate and improve their products, and there's always going to be different approaches. And I mean, as long as we keep seeing good stuff at these shows, I think it's good. But I do take your point, and certainly looking at Unveiled yesterday compared to the first time I went, which was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that was certainly a smaller gathering, less exhibitors, less media, and I think you probably get around everything without too much problem. But now it's absolutely nuts. I mean, I didn't even see you.
No, I didn't see you either.
Last night. Tom Merritt, whose show I was on earlier on today, he mentioned that he saw you sort of in passing, but didn't get a chance to actually talk to you.
Him, actually.
There were a whole lot of people that I was expecting, and I'm sure were there that I didn't see. I mean, your ability to actually see everything, it's impossible for one person.
Unveiled was particularly massive. Unveiled was traditionally the first of the three, and the smaller one, the one that was a little bit more curated by the CEA, the people who put together CES. And in a way, I kind of regret that it's no longer like that, because honestly, it was as big, if not bigger, than a Pepcom or Showstoppers. Pepcom has always been the biggest, and usually because of that, the most rewarding to cover, because you find good stuff. But tonight was disappointing. I didn't really find that there was much going on there. A lot of it was repeat from Unveil as well. And then the big brands were there, which was good. But, do you really need a Lenovo at Unveiled when they have a booth and they have a press conference? I never understand that. It's odd to me.
Well, I think that they just want as much interaction with media as possible. I actually have found it good having some of those bigger firms like HP and Lenovo at those things, because I don't necessarily get time to get to their stand, and they have different people that are available to interact with the media. But that said, you've got all these other things to see, but they just want as much coverage as possible. So I guess that's and they can certainly afford to be at everything if they want to.
It's an interesting strategy. So speaking of other things, I mean, now that we've kind of explained it all to you guys, to you folks on the show, how these three mini events, sub events of CES. There's also obviously the main CES show, and that starts tomorrow, Tuesday, and that's where like the Samsung has a booth at the side of like half or even probably a full football field, and LG and Samsung compete with the best booth, and it's something to behold. You have to see it once in your life. And the public actually on the last day of CES, I believe, can get in at a really low price, like $40 or $50. I can't remember the details. They might have changed this now, but it used to be the case. And if you're ever in Vegas for CES and you're not in the business, do yourself the favor to go to CES and check out these massive booths. Like Sony has one, and all the big Intel, Qualcomm, etc. And of course, that happens for 4 days, and then. But we also had all these press conferences yesterday, day -1, and a few of them yesterday, and today most of them. I spent my birthday really having the busiest day of the year for me in terms of work, and probably the busiest day of CES. And I started with LG at 8 in the morning. And I didn't go to all the conferences that I was invited to and I could go. I just kind of picked and chose. And LG showed like a whole breadth of appliances and TVs, not so much mobile devices, but and the common theme was, last year we told you all we would have Wi-Fi on all our devices and be IoT ready. This year we're adding AI functionality to it. And it was in this very typical kind of Korean mega company weirdness, in the sense that they were giving us examples like, the AI knows from your calendar that you just went to the gym. So if you come home to get changed into your work clothes, obviously whatever laundry you're going to throw into the dryer or washer at that point is going to be your gym laundry. So it'll know to pick the gym clothes program on the washer from interacting with your smartphone. And then these weird far-fetched scenarios that I never understood. And as an aside, because eventually I want to talk about the Qualcomm press conference, the Samsung press conference. As an aside, I always find it interesting that, these super high-end washers and dryers and fridges they sell, they obviously sell eventually, that are like, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for a fridge and $5,000 for a washer dryer pair. To me, if you have that kind of money, you don't need a smart washer or dryer because you probably have a maid that uses your washer and dryer and doesn't care that it has any smarts or brains because they are the smart and they're much better at being the smarts or brains at doing your laundry. And I hate to say this, maybe it's a kind of a weird view of the world, but most people buy washers and dryers that don't have this functionality because they can't afford it. And they are probably the ones who need the automation more because they can't hire somebody to do their laundry. So I can't wrap my head around that. And then the other example, Samsung later on showed an example where you're in the car and, you're reminded by the fridge that you're out of milk and to buy some on the way home, and it's you're not sure how much you should buy, so you tap on the console of your car, and it displays a live video or photo of the content of your fridge, and you can see the milk is low. And I guess the camera is right, and I'm going to go buy. Like, who does that? It's never going to happen.
Some of these cases are just bizarre. And when we look at, you mentioned the washing machine and the dryer, right? Well, this is actually already automation, right? Because these are automatic washing machines. Now, people that have been around long enough, and I haven't, but I've seen the old technology and old ways of doing washing. Well, you didn't just throw stuff into a machine and have it all handle it for you. The big load is actually the hard work of washing clothes is actually being done by the machine and has been now for
decades,
quite a number of decades. So we're now looking at those incremental things that can be done to improve this. And again, the dryer, it's the lazy option, not or the I'm time poor, so I'm not going to take the washing and hang it up somewhere. I'm going to throw it into a machine that takes care of the job, and that's the bulk of it. And you can get a low cost dryer that will dry it on a timer, and you can get one that costs a little bit more that'll turn it off once it's ready. And look, if you want to spend however many X that and get one that alerts you on your smartphone when it's done, sure, but it's not a big leap, is it? Or a huge advantage probably for most people.
It's interesting to me that these big Korean companies and some of the Japanese and Chinese companies too, are kind of like in the business of building hardware, these machines, these washers, these fridges, and so they're trying to perfect them and improve them technologically so that they're smarter, and they're doing a phenomenal job. I have an LG washer and dryer, not a high-end one, a mid-range one. And they're awesome. Really, they weigh the load and they're able to know exactly how much water and how long the cycle, and it tells you ahead of time how long it's going to run. And the dryer can adjust based on the amount of humidity, it's phenomenal. And it's great, and that's useful to me, and it's not too expensive. But the connectivity part I don't get necessarily as a feature, because what I think Korea is not seeing is what's happening in America, in North America, and I think in Europe, in the wealthy parts of North America and Europe, which is people are farming out this stuff to third-party companies, not even hiring a maid. They're actually hiring a laundry service. I know so many people in San Francisco, they don't do their laundry ever. They don't even have a maid. They get it all, it's all farmed out.
Yeah, someone comes and picks it up, it's done, and it's dropped back to you.
So why would you need to even buy a washer and dryer? And why spend $5,000 on it? Because it's connected and smart.
So what we need is that is that maid robot then to run around to work out what's that bit of clothing that's on the floor? Does it need to be in the wash? Get it done.
So LG has a few domestic robots that I think are only available in Korea and Japan right now. And they're really cool and cute. And I have a thing for robots. So I'm kind of into it. But at the same time, I'm like, one of them is a shopping cart robot, so it follows you around the store, and it has a barcode scanner. Every time you put something in it, it scans it and adds it to your pile. And then one of them is like, a porter robot for the hotel. And they're all based on the same platform, like the same kind of motor module and the same, display and voice and little head that pivots and talks to you. And then they have these payload parts where you can be like, a hotel porter and a shopping cart, and the other one is like the domestic version that can do basic things. But none of them have arms, so they can't really pick things up. And I think eventually we're going to get to that. But I think I'm not even sure that matters because, as I said, everything can be outsourced if you can find if it's economically feasible and cost effective. You don't necessarily need machines to do it. We all know that, right?
Yeah. But certainly there are lots of things that robotics will take care of for us going forward.
Yeah.
And even the mention of the hotel porter.
I think that's cool.
Look. I check in and out of lots of hotels, and
so do I.
Probably quite a useful
I
function.
see those,
right?
but I think for domestic robots, until as you said, you can have one that literally can pick up, has an arm and can pick up stuff for you. It's not, I think the vacuum robots we have are useful. I think that there's, uses for other robots through the house that, like for people who have disabilities maybe and need assistance. I think a lot of that is very valid, but I'm not quite sure right now that most people need unless it's like a humanoid with arms.
We seem to have a big gap, and at Sony's press conference today we saw Abo.
Of course, their new Abo, right?
And this is their new one. The first one was 1999 when
it was
they
a dog.
Showed that, and this is a dog, and it's very cute, and you can talk to it, and you can rub it on its back and its head and under its chin, and it responds and gets to recognise family members. It'll bond more with those that spend more time with it. So you've got that at one end, and then at the other end we've got the Boston Dynamics technology, which is just creepy and freaky. There will be a point in between those.
I know,
at some
we're
point
far from that.
That we find some nice robotics that we're all very interested in. But whenever we see the Boston Dynamics stuff, which just looks insane, and we saw them doing backflips recently, but just very scary and intimidating. But once that sort of merges with the Abo type friendliness and cuteness, we could be in quite a cool place. And I guess a little bit of time will have to pass before it becomes actually affordable as well.
Yeah, and look, I think that from as an engineer, the technology, the technical aspects of making a washer better, I'm all on board. I just feel like there is a point where it doesn't seem worth it anymore. And I think that point is, we've reached it in some ways because in, parts of the world right now, people don't really need these appliances because they farm this stuff out. And so I think what I was trying to get to is that I think for Samsung and LG, because it's part of their core business to build appliances, home appliances, they're continuing to believe that that's what people want. But I think they should also look at the fact that the market doesn't necessarily want that. But what I think is cool that they're doing is, there's an independent company I saw tonight at PepCon that showed a laundry folding robot. It's for consumer use. It's $6.99. It's expensive, and it's about the size of a washing machine. And you have to feed it one piece of clothing at a time by picking up two of the corners and putting it in. But it figures out what the item is, and it folds it and puts it in about 5 seconds.
Oh, that's cool.
It's really cool. And along the same lines, for even more money, LG a few years back showed a laundry folding robot, and now they have a basically an ironing robot, but it doesn't use an ironing board and an iron. It steams your clothes in place. So you hang these clothes in this fridge size appliance that's like essentially a closet, and it steams them and shakes them while they're on the rack, basically, and it makes them, like, presses them, basically.
How much is this? I need that.
Oh, it's like $2,000 or something, and it's all smart and connected, and it talks to the washer and the dryer. But I can actually see that because I think for a lot of people, the instant gratification, what is still a problem with somebody coming to pick up your laundry and doing it and bring it back is how long it takes. One of the advantages of having a washer and dryer at home, knowing that I have them, is that I can do a load of laundry, a simple load, in about an hour and 10 minutes, including the dryer, very reasonably. And that's actually pretty much instantaneous in terms of laundry. Now, this pressing machine, if you had to get somebody to press your clothes, you won't get the turnaround that this machine can do, which is like 20 minutes or half an hour. So if you're a business person that has a really busy life and you have to wear a suit or something, have your clothes pressed on a regular basis, and you have money, I could imagine you might not have a washer and dryer in your house at all. You might farm that out, but you might have that $2,000 LG pressing machine, or Samsung, whoever made it. I think it's LG, but it's very cool because that to me is, a use case where I can see people spending the money because they want the speed and the efficiency of it, and not having to send it out.
Now, I mean, just on a different perspective on these things, did you see any technology this year or any innovations that are focused on parts of the world where there isn't so much money floating around? The majority world, developing world type countries. I've occasionally seen that at these events, but I haven't noticed anything
Not
this
so
year.
much, but I think that's something you want to explore at the main event. There's an entire wing of the main convention center that's dedicated to startups from the developing world, and they obviously are focused on their developing countries' needs, right? But I do see occasionally you see a startup that's doing something, to better the lives of people in places where having a pretty regular power is a struggle, right? And certainly I think we're seeing a lot of that, but it's obviously not as sexy to report about, so I think the media don't jump on it. But every year I see something about that. It's usually later in the show's zeitgeist or period of reporting. And for you folks that are listening around going, when are we getting to the phones? We'll get to it. It's not just about the phones. This is CES, so we really have to talk about everything. And what we should talk about at some point is televisions. But I haven't seen too much things that are targeting the developing world yet.
Though there is always that flow on, right? For what starts out as a very expensive product, over time becomes lower and lower cost. And we look at so many technologies we take for granted now that are very accessible, and of course there is all sorts of technology that is being used in environments where there isn't the sort of money to throw around, personally on things like something to help make your clothes look a little bit nicer.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think the biggest disruptor in the last few years has been the mobile phone. I mean, you can now buy a very, very decent mobile phone for $50 $50 to $100. That's a lot of money for a developing country still. But you can buy a phone for, I think the cheapest phone that I've ever heard about was $4 US. And I think LG was selling a phone for $10 through Walmart in the US at one point, 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, one of the tech publications reviewed it just, for shits and giggles, as it were. And they said, it's not great, but considering $10 buys you something that even if you don't have a cell phone plan, connects to a Wi-Fi at a library and has a web browser that's WebKit based and will let you browse the web pretty much in a good way and in a reliable and working way. Wow, right? And I think that's I'm always excited about technology. I I don't like saying commoditization. In a way it is, but the democratization of technology.
Yes, yeah.
It's always exciting to me, like that's why in 2017 I said, the Moto E4 is probably the best phone that you can buy, on a budget. It's $80 and it is you're getting about 60 to 70% of the experience of a flagship device for 1/10 of the price, and that is insane. It's basically as good as a mid-range Moto was 2 years ago, and that's no small feat. But
and when you think of that, taking that out just another 5 years,
exactly,
in terms of what will be really low cost and really accessible, will be phenomenal. Take it out 10, 20 years, and I don't think we can really imagine quite what the landscape's going to look like.
I have this, bringing things back to mobile, I have this kind of vision / fantasy / dream that one day you can walk into a 7-Eleven, wherever it is in the world, and buy a little blister pack tablet device, and it might be as small as a big phone today, like an iPhone 10, but it might be as big as an iPad, 10-inch iPad, and it'll come in different costs and screen sizes, but it's completely not disposable but recyclable. And what I mean by that is you buy the device for $10 or $5 or $20 most, and it comes pre-charged, and with the technology that exists at this point in my vision, you can get like a week's battery life out of a device like that, solid use, from one charge. And it comes with a data plan built in as well. So ubiquitous connectivity that also depletes over time because there's only so much you get with it. And when you deplete either or, you just return it to 7-Eleven and you get a recycling fee back, like the bottle fees.
Yeah.
And you pick up another one. Yeah. And it's got an e-ink thing on the back that's always on that shows you the how much data is left, how much battery is left. So you as you use them, you throw them in a drawer somewhere in your kitchen or in your office, and your grandma comes home and she forgot her laptop or whatever. You're like, let me rummage around. Oh, here's a 10-inch one which is like half power and 3/4 data. Why don't you use that for the time you're here? And you give it to them. They log in with their Google or whatever. You pick your ecosystem of choice, and boom, they're in. And it's just as good as a mid-range devices today. And it's just not frustrating, and you're done. And it's, rugged, water resistant. It's just bulletproof, and it's cheap, and it gets recycled. And what I mean by that is when you drop it off, you get your recycling fee back. But they recharge it. They reset the data on it. There's no ports on it, right? It doesn't have anything. By that point, I imagine that wireless audio will be pretty ubiquitous. Being able to throw the screen on a larger display, a projector or a TV, like casting it, will be also ubiquitous. And so I think this is something I think we're going to see. And the developing world is going to benefit from much more rapidly than we are. And as such, I think, like the 7-Eleven blister pack idea is really kind of the main thing here, because it's a model they already have with bottled goods, right? So yeah. I want to see that. If you're out there and you have a budget and some R&D money and you want to create a startup, this is the one to do, because I don't think I have the know-how or the patience to start this business, but I think it'd be great. Now
you were mentioning in there, just on a sidetrack, be waterproof and robust and so on. Have you come across Caterpillar doing smartphones? Not
at the show yet. They might have a booth at the main show when it starts tomorrow. I haven't received any press releases from them either.
Yeah, so I got an email from them today.
Oh yeah,
and I just wasn't even aware that they were in this game, but. They seem to have a number of devices that they've already launched into the market.
I reviewed the S60 a year and a half ago when it was first announced. It's the one with the FLIR thermal camera in it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, it was a little pricey, but it was very rugged and very dust and water resistant, and had a FLIR infrared night vision thermal camera, which mostly thermal is the part. If you're a contractor doing house repairs and things like that, or even a car mechanic, you can use the thermal camera to see hot spots in like in the wiring of your house, or the engine of your car, and kind of maybe figure out what might be going wrong. And I thought that was really cool. But the specs were pretty respectable. The only thing that I found was it could be better was the display, primarily because it was only 720p. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem was it was a 4.7-inch display, which today feels absolutely tiny.
Yeah.
And then, because it had all these ruggedization layers, like crack resistant screen, made out of like lamination. The optical properties of that screen were pretty poor. You lost a lot of the quality of the actual panel behind it that I think was actually pretty good because of that. And but other than that, it was very interesting. And I don't know if they've come out any new phones since. I think that's the last one they've done.
Yeah, so I think they do have a new one, and the info of that will no doubt come out over the next. The next day or two. I'll have a look while we're chatting and see if I can.
Does it still have the thermal camera on it?
They've got a model with the thermal camera, and then they've got at least a couple of other models as well. So I just it's interesting to see a brand with the sort of the strength that they have that's pivoted their brand into smartphones. And they certainly seem to be sticking at it. So yeah, I'll be curious whether they're still around in this space in a few years' time, because we seem to have quite a number of brands now that have a reasonably small market share, and really it's this type of differentiation that's probably going to be needed for brands to stick about for a period. But whether they're selling them at high enough prices that justifies them, developing these devices, and quite how that will work, or whether we just end up, if you want a really robust phone, you do as lots of people do today, and get a case, a special case, and there will be so many of those shown off at CES.
Oh my god,
cases
and headphones are always overloaded here. But here's the thing, to me, and this is kind of what the takeaway was from a lot of people commenting on my review video on the S60, was that they said, look, it is indeed very robust and very rugged and water resistant and all that, and dust proof, but you're still only getting a mid-range phone for the price of a flagship. And sure, the thermal imaging is cool too, but most people, what they really want is what Samsung offers with the Active line, the S8 Active, the S7 Active prior to that,
yes,
which take a flagship phone with no compromises and ruggedizes and water resists it a little further. And it's not going to be as rugged and strong as the cat phones, but at the same time, you're going to have a significant improvement in strength compared to like the Galaxy S8 normal, and you're still getting an S8 in terms of performance and features. And I think that has a lot more potential in terms of marketability, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So the product that they were highlighting was the Cat S41, which I think has been in the market now for probably at least 2 months. So it's not brand new, although I think it's probably reasonably new in terms of maybe coming into the US market. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep in mind that the S60, I think, was sold in the US, but unlocked on Amazon or something. I mean, it wasn't like, it's not, like, Cat is a much more popular brand in Europe. They're a British-based company for their mobile division. Let's talk a little bit more about the press conference. So I went to LG, then I went to Hisense, the TV. So I'm kind of segueing into TVs here. Hisense, and then followed by TCL, then Samsung, then Qualcomm, And then I was going to go to Sony, but I somehow had a brain fart, and I was at Mandalay Bay, which is at one end of the strip, and realized that, Sony is at the convention center, not at Mandalay like all the other press conferences. And by the time I realized that, there was no way I was going to make it on time. So I said, well, maybe I should just drop Sony. And, I was invited to others, like yesterday I was invited to NVIDIA. Today I was also invited to Intel, and I just wasn't going to be able to make them all. So I had to pick and choose. So you went to Sony today, and I went to all the other ones. And my takeaway, I already kind of talked about what LG and Samsung brought to the table, like AI, all the things, voice assistant, all the things, appliances galore. In terms of TVs, though, the big takeaway was, of course, 4K HDR is pretty much established now at really reasonable price points too, which is really cool, I think. But more importantly, for LCD TVs, the IPS panels, the biggest has been local contrast control via very localized LED backlighting, which is getting more and more, I guess segmented, like they divide it up into more numbers of backlight elements to get even more accurate rendition of contrast, which I think is exciting because it brings it closer to OLED. And from what I saw, it looks really good. I still am a bigger fan of OLED given the choice, and I think LG and Samsung really, particularly LG, really owns that space. But Samsung announced the first LED TV. And what I'm talking about here is individual light emitting diodes making up pixels. This is the holy grail because it doesn't have the wear out of the organic LED, the OLED, and it is as good contrast ratio and as good power consumption as OLED. And I didn't even know that was possible. Right now, the smallest LED you can make, it's good for those gigantic displays. When you get close to them, you can see the individual pixels. You can see those at trade shows all the time.
Sure, yeah.
But they finally made a home TV where the dots on these LEDs are small enough. And I don't know if they're commercializing it yet or is something they're just demoing. But to me, that's the future. Now, OLED is definitely going to be a big part of our lives for TVs for a while. But I think IPS is going to go away and OLED and LED, pure LED TVs are going to become the thing. And, so Hisense and TCL both had a lot of improvement on the LCD IPS localized backlight technologies. And then TCL had a big emphasis on their partnership with Roku that they've had for a really long time. And they launched together a soundbar in which they coined the world's first smart soundbar because it has Alexa and Assistant in it and stuff. But I thought it was interesting because I'm really I know that TCL and Roku have a really strong relationship, but co-branding something like that I thought was a bit odd. But hey, whatever,
So what does that deliver? Does it also have the full Roku unit in it?
Yeah.
So instead of having all your smarts tied up in your TV, which you might want to keep a little bit longer.
But then again, if you have a TCL TV, the Roku is already in there. So it's
But the technology dates. So if you move that out to the soundbar, then you replace
their
the
idea was
soundbar
that
maybe.
the soundbar might be able to be used for music. That they found that a lot of people use their Roku boxes to stream music.
That's true.
And the TV is just on as a amplified
speaker
system.
Yeah.
So they said if you have a soundbar that also has Roku in it, now you can choose, the soundbar can play music while you watch Netflix, but without sound and subtitles maybe. And it was kind of this weird thing, but look, kudos to them. TCL is definitely the fastest growing TV brand in the US. They're super popular and their prices are great and the quality of their product is really high. So, good for them.
And certainly Samsung, we expect them to put a huge effort into TVs because it's such a big revenue earner for them. They've always got new high-end things. They also showed off their modular or they talked about the modular TV concept as well. Now, that fascinates me, and I'm sure this is not going to be a low-cost sort of technology, but the idea that you can, basically build up whatever panel size you want up to 146-inch by putting modules together, and even different aspect ratios and so on were possible. It sounds
in
pretty
some
cool.
ways, LG, kind of implied that a little bit with their signature W line last year, which was the TV of the show. 3 millimeter thin. You literally roll it on the wall like wallpaper TV, and it's got a flat ribbon cable. There's no electronics in the OLED panel, and you flat ribbon cable which you can embed behind the wallpaper and behind the inside the drywall if you have to. And the soundbar contains all the electronics. In a way, that's modular too, because you can attach there's different display sizes that go with the same soundbar. And I think you're right. Samsung's just taking it to another extreme level. I mean, look, this has been around forever. I remember in the early 80s drooling over Sony's Trinitron modular system. Do you remember that? They had a Trinitron monitor. It was just a display and different sizes. And then they had these speakers you could mount on the side of it, screw on. There were also different sizes, different amplifiers built in, active speakers. And then they had a tuner that was like looked like a stereo component. Of course, analog back then. And, they had all these different, they had a VCR and they had a separate tuner. So the VCR was just a dumb, mechanism. And then it had a separate tuner for the VCR, which is identical to the other tuner, right? And just the way it was connected in the back made the system completely modular. So you could have a single tuner or a dual tuner. And it is really cool. And we're talking early 80s. And so, we digitize the whole thing, bring it to today's 4K HDR spec level, OLED madness. And why wouldn't Samsung do that, But I think it was interesting to see, Hisense and TCL are basically newish brands of TVs in the US, relatively speaking, compared to the well-established Vizio, Samsung, LG, and I don't know who else is in the game anymore.
Sony was certainly showing off some interesting things, and I had a look at a prototype that they had, which was an 8K TV. But what they highlighted was the brightness on this was 10,000 nits, and
wow.
They put it next to sort of, I think, a fairly top of the line production TV. In this somewhat darker section of their stand, and boy,
do you need that much brightness out of a TV? That's the question. I find that most modern TVs are way too bright.
It looked stunning. It just looked. It did, and they've been developing, as they always are, the chips and the internals, and it used. A localized backlighting, so the blacks were black, and it is very impressive. So it's still a space where there's plenty of work going on for probably the average consumer. We end up getting these things once they're
affordable,
affordable, accessible. But what comes out, even from the lower cost brands, 2 or 3 years later, after we see the very cutting edge, becomes very accessible, very low prices, and you walk into retailers, certainly here in the US, and you can get an amazing TV for
you can get a
sub $1,000.
No, you can get a really
huge.
good 4K HDR TV in the 15-inch range now for $600.
It's incredible.
It's amazing. But I want to talk to you a bit more about before we go back to Sony, because I want to finish the podcast with the phones you saw. It's funny, ironically, that I did not see any new phones at the show yet, and you did, Paul. But I knew Sony was going to do something. They're really the only ones that are doing anything about phones, as far as I know. So before I jump into that, Qualcomm, of course, I was at that press conference after Samsung. And they, pretty much rehashed a lot of the things they talked about when I was in Hawaii last month in December. And I would encourage listeners to go back a couple of podcasts where I had a Qualcomm executive. We talked about things like Snapdragon 845, which, was announced then. Snapdragon 835 and 845 running Windows 10, meaning that we're going to start seeing some ultra-thin, ultra-light laptops with built-in LTE that run for 20 hours of battery life, right? In fact, 2 of them were announced in Hawaii. Strangely, and again, don't take this as the word, but I have not seen any announcements by Lenovo or HP or anybody yet of devices here at CES that are Snapdragon-based Windows 10 devices. but maybe I haven't looked very much.
Well, it might be that there's still work going on behind the scenes to make that possible. So
my understanding is that they're going to be more. We're going to look at more at like March, April, May for those. Computex time, I think, is when we're going to see those. But I still like the ones they announced in Hawaii were. One was a little clunky, was the Asus one, but it was affordable. And then the other one was a detachable, which is not the form factor I like. So what I want to see is like a MacBook Air, Asus ZenBook style, like super thin, super light, eminently portable, LTE-based Qualcomm Snapdragon Windows 10 laptop, and that can really do some decent lifting. Not video game grade, but that's when I'm going to be excited. Even if it's $1,500, I don't care, because my MacBook Air that I'm recording this on right now was a $1,799 fully loaded. No, it's not an Air. It's a 12-inch MacBook. But it was fully loaded, and in terms of CPU performance, it's not really that great. So, but I live with it as my travel work computer all the time. So what, other than the TVs you just talked about, and the robot from the Aibo you talked about from Sony earlier, what else did Sony have on the roster for you? So
there were some headphones that they showed off, and we used to noise cancelling headphones, and in fact they showed some noise cancelling headphones off. Waterproof, sort of sporty type things that are available in a. They don't look like Apple's AirPod, but they are in a sort of a size that works in a in a somewhat similar manner. And then there's a variation on that where they are actually connected. Wired as well, so that there's two variations.
So they were called Xperia Ear, correct?
No, that one is called if I've got the product name right. And this is what happens with companies like Sony that have to have a model number on everything. The WFSP 700M. Now,
you heard it here first.
Now, what was more interesting to me and more unique, and I don't know whether these are how close they are to coming to market, was a demonstration of the Xperia Air, and I tried.
That's what you're talking
tried
about.
These on EAR, the Xperia Air, and this is not quite an in-ear type of earbud. Because they don't go into the ear canal, and they've got space around them. So basically, you are hearing the music or whatever it is that you're listening to, but also able to interact in a normal manner with the outside world, like what you do if there's a speaker in the room playing some music. Or if you're sitting at your desk and your computer, you're watching something on your computer, but you can also interact with other people in the room. Now, these will take it a little bit further than just listening to music. They work in, and this is still I'm not quite sure where it is from concept to being ready for launch. But it's designed to work with some of their AI assistant type technology. It will, for instance, read you text messages as they come in, and it can, in one ear, be playing you music and reading a text message to you in the other ear.
Interesting.
You can control it by tilting your head. So if you're listening to some music, you want to go to the next track, then you quickly flex your neck to the right, and that will move you to the next track. Or if you want to go back to the previous one, you tilt your head to the left.
I'm not sure how reliable that's going to be.
I tried that, and once I was familiar with it, it took me a couple of goes. The first time I did it a little bit slowly, but once it was just give it a little bit of a flick, it picks that up. It also knows when they're in your ears, apparently to do with proximity, and it's got some way of sensing that they're both in position. And they also were you had the ability to sort of swipe on them for volume up and down,
right?
And
of course.
Pause and play and a few bits and pieces.
And they're independent, right? They're two completely separate units, kind of like AirPods.
Yeah, and then they have a charging
Cradle.
case.
Yeah.
And that in itself has some battery to it, but also that plugs in to be recharged. So kind of a curious little mobile bit of mobile tech. I hope this one, that they work through whatever else they've got to do in developing the software and bring it to market.
I mean, I want to see, I find the AirPods are a technological tour de force. I think that for their size and the quality and reliability of the connection, Apple's nailed it, but I'm not enthused with the sound quality. So I actually want to see all the big players, Sony, like we've seen Bose a little bit now, we've seen Samsung, and a whole bunch of kickstarted projects, some of them worse than others, that have or have not been delivered properly, address the, individual earbud that are completely wireless problem. But I'm happy to hear Sony's doing it, because I want to see the big brands do it. Like Samsung did it, it was so. Maybe their Gen 2. A lot of things with Samsung take 2 or 3 gens to really develop. And I want to see, Bowen and Wilkins. I want to see all these other brands do it and do it right. And that way we have variety. That way I'm not stuck with AirPods for the best experience. I have other best experiences. And I'm not stuck with Sony for the best sound quality, but I can go to someone else and get the best sound quality as well.
There was one thing, and I don't know if you saw this at any of the events, but it was a wristband that you would put on.
And you touch your ear, and it has bone conduction?
Yeah, a bone conduction
I've heard about
type
this product. I think it was crowdfunded. And it's funny because the band has a microphone in it, so they didn't do the microphone with bone conduction, but they only did the speaker. So the idea is your phone is in your pocket, it's paired to this band. The band is also a step tracker and stuff, and when you want to pick up the phone, you touch it or you do a gesture or something, and it picks it up. And you put your index finger kind of right against your conch, the part of your ear that's the little flap of ear that sticks out in front of your ear canal, and it touches your bone and it resonates through your bone. And it's a very proven technology. But the problem I have with that is, number one, bone conduction still doesn't sound as good and as loud as other technologies. Number two, why not just pull out your phone or have AirPods, which are phenomenal, right? I mean, other than the sound quality, I don't know. I think it's cool, but somebody also did a Ring. Somebody did a Ring version of that as well.
I think there's a little bit of a market for this, and if you've ever used a smartwatch to have a conversation, that's kind of clunky.
Yeah.
This seems to me like an improvement on that without having to wear something in your ears. So I don't know.
See that. I think the Ring one was interesting because it's not a band; it's just a ring.
Yeah.
You're just wearing a ring like this, and then you put it in your thing in your ear. I'm sure we'll see more. I mean, again, this is being recorded. When you get this podcast, it might be day 2 or 3 of CES. But, this is being recorded day 0, the day before it actually starts. And there's more that we're going to run into. And I will try to podcast a second time this week, probably with a team of the journalists that I know, just for fun. And we'll bring you the rest of it. But
it is closing in on midnight as we record, so we're coming towards the end of the day. What else did you want to chat through? Did you want to talk about these new phones? Let's talk quickly about these phones.
I mean, they're not super new in the sense that we knew they were coming, and they're mid-rangers, so they're not that exciting. You got to see them, play with them. What's your quick take? First of all, tell us what they're called.
So had a play with the Xperia XA2 and XA2 Ultra. As you say, mid-range phones. I think in the US at the moment they're XA1s. Recommended sort of retail prices, I think maybe $399.
Okay.
US, and so they're refreshing that line. It is, I guess, not that common to get a whole lot of phone announcements at CES, right?
Not anymore.
But
Sony is kind of unobtainium in the US. Like I know that the Europeans listen to this and the Asian folk listening to this right now are laughing because they're like, course, you can buy Sony phones anywhere. Well, no, not here. I mean, they're sold unlocked in the US by certain retailers like Amazon, but they're very, very, like, they're like, if you find someone using a Sony phone and you're not at a trade show and they're like not a foreign journalist, like just walking down the street, you find some random person with an Xperia phone, that's a unicorn in the US, okay?
That's funny because I really quite enjoy the Xperia handsets. Now, one thing that I have liked, which I don't think has been available in the US, and we could probably go down a tangent as to why, is the power button fingerprint reader on the side of the Sonys. But in New Zealand where I'm based, that's one of the capabilities, and my wife uses one of the Sony Xperias, and I enjoy getting a chance to use it from time to time, but. Anyway, they've put a fingerprint reader on the back of the XA2, so that's something they added they didn't have in the previous generation. They've gone to 4K video, and just overall, it feels quite close to a sort of a premium higher end.
What's the display size, and is it
handset?
Is it bezel-less, or is it like?
Well, this is interesting because they talk about and they didn't use the term bezel-less, but they used a similar sort of term. And yes, on the sides, it's very similar to other phones like the iPhone 10 in terms of how close the screen gets to the edge, but the top and bottom, far from it.
I see that.
It's not the sort of aspect ratio that
it's a 16:9. It's a standard aspect ratio. Do they tell you the screen sizes? 4.2 inches or 5.2?
Yeah. So
both of them?
I think they're 1080p
it's
display.
6 inches for the XA2
Yeah,
Ultra,
and they've stepped up because they did have a 720p panel on the last model.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of top phones now that are either 1080p or not much more, right? So, I think we're seeing pretty good specs in their 3300 milliamp hour batteries. So, these are a reasonably good device for the money. Dual cameras on the front and a single camera on the rear. With optical image stabilization, I think just on the main.
What about the L2? What's that?
I didn't really have too much of a look into the L2. I think that was another sort of step down, being a lower end device, but they did also announce that, but they weren't really. There wasn't a whole lot of noise about that. And I'm not even sure. They probably did have it on display, but I
I'm
didn't
going to
really
swing
have
by
a
their
look.
booth and have a look. I wanted to quickly add, because I just realized after I went to unveil yesterday, I went to a Honor press conference. Not Huawei, Honor, the other brand that Huawei makes. I know it's complicated because it's so confusing. Honor and Huawei are two brands from the same company that make phones, and they have different demographics and different, marketing targets, but it's very confusing. I personally think that the Honor brand shouldn't be a brand. It should be a range within Huawei, and Huawei should be the master brand. That's my opinion.
I agree.
But Honor had an event, and they announced officially the V10, the View 10, whatever it's called. And apparently it has some sort of face recognition that's similar to what's on the OnePlus 5T. So probably not used for Android Pay, which, by the way, today got officially renamed Google Pay.
Yes.
So as a news record right there. So not probably likely to work with Google Pay, but likely to unlock your phone. So very similar, and it needs light, so it's based very much like the OnePlus 5T on ambient light. It does turn on the screen though to give it a bit of light as well. Interesting, but they announced, so they made that official. I did a hands-on with that phone back in November or something. Look on my YouTube channel, you'll see that, and I'll link it in the show notes. But they also announced the Honor 7X, which is a really fantastic, less than $200 phone. mid-ranger in red, new color. And then they finally talked a little more about something they're working on for future Honor devices, which I'm sure parent company Huawei is working on for future Huawei devices, which is a pure Face ID competitor. Now, it's not using the same infrared matrix projection as the iPhone, which is basically a miniaturized Kinect, but it is using some sort of depth sensing with infrared, measuring depth by projecting something. And so it'll be interesting. We've discussed this on the podcast before, but I really do have a hunch that 2018 is going to be the year where the big players, Huawei, Samsung, possibly LG, are going to come out with phones that directly compete with Face ID in terms of actually being able to be used with Google Pay and being a secure technology and a reliable technology. Because you know how it is. Apple does it first and everybody else scrambles to catch up at that point. And I'm not saying that as a fan.
Or they do it right.
Exactly.
Because
they don't do it first, they do it right. Yeah. That's exactly what I meant. So, yeah. Anyway, we should probably wrap it up. I want... for people who don't know who you are, can you tell them where they can find you on Twitter or on the internet?
Yeah,
where your podcast is located?
I can just be tracked down on Twitter, Paul Spain. I put up videos on Facebook and on LinkedIn too. So those are places to find me. My main podcast at the moment, New Zealand Tech Podcast. Probably not of huge interest to people outside of New Zealand. The new project I'm working on is called Disruption Playbook. That's at disruptionplaybook.com. And that is all about talking to people that are innovating, coming up with disruptive technologies, also talking to a few people that have been in companies that have been disrupted, and talking about those stories. How do we get from here to the next place? And what are the techniques that the companies that are succeeding are doing? What are the techniques that people have tried that maybe aren't working? And it's an area I'm absolutely fascinated in. So that's my new project that'll be launching over the next few months.
Congratulations. That sounds awesome. I look forward to it. You guys know where to find me. I'm Tanker on Twitter. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character, but drop the vowels. And you can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/Miriam Jouar. That's MYRIM. My full name, but with a Y. And then, of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel and subscribe to this podcast. If you're hearing this somewhere and you don't know how to get to it, mobiletechpodcast.com. You'll find the RSS feed there. We're also on iTunes and Pocket Casts, so look for us, search for us there. And thanks for being on, Paul. It was really, really nice to have you on again, because technically you did episode 0 with me.
That's true. No, it's been enjoyable. It's always great to catch up when I'm here in the US. Maybe one day we'll see you down in New Zealand.
I would love to come. I've never been, and I really want to go sometime. So we'll have to make it happen somehow.
Cool.
All right, folks. We'll talk to you next week or later this week with more CES, hopefully. Cheers.
See ya.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.